afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me on this session around fraud and why it can happen to you. So my name is Ben. I'm currently a product manager for data and insights at OneSpan. Before this, I spent about 5 years fighting fraud in OneSpan. So I've been leading the global fraud consulting team until quite recently. So I have a bit of hands-on experience with the inner workings of cybercrime and fraud, and I hope to give you some insights today, and I hope to give you some tips as well on how you can stay a bit safer online. So you can move to the first slide, please. So I always like to bring up some statistics. So there's some interesting facts about cybercrime that sometimes surprise people. So cybercrime is one of the fastest growing forms of transnational crimes. Might not be so surprising because, well, it's very easy to access anywhere in the world through the internet. So it's very easy to be global. And so, global criminal networks are also fueled by, the existence of the internet. It's a business type that exceeds currently $6 trillion a year. So that's a huge amount of money. And I actually have to update this slide every single year because the number keeps on increasing so fast. So if I did a presentation a couple of years ago, that number would still be around $3 trillion. Currently, we're sitting over $6 trillion. And then another fact that often will surprise people is actually cybercrime profits globally exceeds the profits that are coming from drug trafficking. So hopefully that will give you kind of an insight in terms of how massive this actual industry is. It's actually bigger than the drug trafficking industry in terms of profits. Of course, margins are also very high in cybercrime. And so, unfortunately, despite over $170 billion being spent on cybersecurity worldwide, it is still and continues to be a fast-growing industry and a big problem for many companies and people all over the world. So moving on to the next slide. So this is some more insights into why is cybercrime so big, right? As I said, margins are very high. It's highly profitable. There are huge amounts of targets available. You have worldwide access. It's, of course, also low risk because you don't actually have to do anything in person. It's much, much easier to stay, safe and anonymous over the internet. And actually, more than 80% of the major hacks and breaches and types of fraud that we see are coming from organized crime groups. So typically we have this image that, a hacker is this malicious individual with a laptop in a hoodie and a mask. We actually see that most real hackers are actually operating in organized crime networks. And like I said, because it is so profitable, you can expect organized crime to go in that direction because crime always follows the money, right? So criminals started recruiting hackers and people with technical skills. They develop business plans, new ideas. And so that's how really cybercrime became so big. Another thing that we see recently is that there's a huge rise in terms of crime as a service. So while most of us are familiar with things such as software as a service or platform as a service, crime as a service is very, very similar, but as the name suggests, a bit more malicious. So rather than a group having to build their own malware, they can actually rent that malware from another group, and then they can commit their crimes using assets that they will buy or rent from experts that have developed them, which gives a lot more people access to things that normally they wouldn't have because they will not need technical skills to execute on it. And so we see that organized crime is also quite developed and functions almost identically to a regular business. So they will have salary packages, they might have paid benefits, holidays, and things like that. So they are much more advanced than some people think that they might be. So you can move to the next slide. So, you see that this is actually quite a lucrative business. So maybe you ask yourself, how do I become a fraudster? Is it difficult? And what kind of skills do I need? So you can play the next few animations. So do I need to, develop malware? No, you don't need to learn that. You can actually, get access to that. Do I need to learn hacking? No, again, you don't need to. Do I need to learn to build websites, to build, maybe a phishing page? Even that you don't need to learn. So you can actually buy or rent everything that you would need. And we'll have a look into that if we go to the next slide. I'll give you a bit of insight in what you can find. So this is an example of a dark web marketplace where the seller is currently offering an Amazon phishing page with promised high success rates. So it's a fully functional Amazon phishing page. So you don't need to do anything. All you need to do is buy the page and host it somewhere. And then hopefully either through ads or phishing links, try to get people onto your page. You can also see that the seller has a high reputation. So he's got a 4.7 star rating, 6,200 reviews. And if you look around a bit further on the image, you can see that there's tons of similar things being offered on this marketplace. So if you go to the next slide, we'll look at some other examples of what you can buy online. So maybe you want to buy some identities. So this is another marketplace where you can literally buy identities. And so they're sorted by credit score. So the higher the credit score, typically, the more valuable the identity will be. So you can see prices range, between $100 and $150 typically for a full identity, including social security numbers. They've got credit score and credit reports and everything. So yeah, your identity is essentially being trafficked for about $100, which isn't that much money. And it's pretty scary, the amount of identities and things like that are being sold. So going to the next slide, we have another example, I believe. Yes. So this is another marketplace, and here you can buy compromised machines. So instead of infecting machines yourself, you can even buy access to machines that have already been infected by someone else. And so you see in different countries, you see how many machines are available to purchase, and then you get full access to these machines, which means you can then try to steal credentials from them. You can use them for various other malicious purposes, which I'll probably explain to you later in terms of how that works. But yeah, you can simply buy a compromised machine, so you don't even need to have malware yourself. You don't need to spread it. You can have someone else do that and pay them for that service. So moving on to the next slide. So yeah, where does all my stolen information go, right? So fraudsters are compromising machines, stealing information, and so like I hopefully managed to show you, most of this stuff is actually being trafficked on underground markets, typically on the dark web, which is fairly easy to access by just using the Tor browser. So what do we find there? Well, we find anything from personal information, financial information, which can be credentials, credit card numbers, healthcare related information, anything that can be somehow valuable will be trafficked online. And if we look at the other side, we can see kind of what those things are being used for, right? So we can use that for identity theft and other kinds of malicious schemes. So here, this is where I try to explain a bit how botnets play such a big role in terms of cybercrime. So what we see is typically you will have what is called the botnet owner or operator, or even bot herder, as they typically call them. And they will have a huge network of compromised machines that they've established by infecting different machines with malware. And then they will use this network and they will monetize that. And so some different ways you can monetize those compromised machines are, of course, you can rent them out for different kinds of services, right? So they can use those machines to send spam emails. They can use them to host phishing pages. They can use them if they have a large number to execute denial of service attacks on other people's websites or networks. They can also then sell the credentials that are being stolen from those machines. So there's huge amounts of things on your machine that can actually be monetized, and that will be monetized when you are compromised. So it's not just your passwords, but even just your machine itself has value to a malicious actor. So moving to the next slide. So you might wonder, are people really buying all of that, right? Like, is it really that common, or who's buying that stuff? Well, this is a picture of a dashboard of someone who was actually selling, I believe, stolen credentials and credit card information. And it might not be visible on the slide, but this is a time span of less than 3 months. It's somewhere in the high range of 2 months. Let's say 2.5 months. And so if we look at their earnings in that time frame, they managed to make very close to $300,000. So this is a huge amount of money. This person was making roughly $100,000 a month selling stolen information that they managed to steal from compromised machines. So as I said, it is very, very lucrative. And this again proves that this business is profitable and is actually very, very huge. So moving on to the next slide, please. So if we look at, what are some of the most common attacks that people execute against businesses themselves? So probably top of the list is usually business email compromise, very, very common thing where, emails will be compromised and then they can use those emails to kind of try and social engineer people into doing certain things. Just recently, I think this week, I saw an interesting article about an organization that was compromised by ransomware. And so one of the IT staff was actually kind of committing BEC by trying to redirect the payments for the ransomware payments to their own Bitcoin wallet. Unfortunately, they were very easily caught because they were not very good at what they were doing. And they accessed everything from their home IP address. And so it was very easy to identify that they were doing this themselves. But in this case, they were kind of an insider threat using BEC to try and redirect ransomware payments. So very funny and ironic case, actually. CEO and CFO fraud, also very popular. So, that's, again, social engineering is almost always somehow involved in these kind of things, right? And this is where the attacker will try to convince someone to send a large amount of money that isn't supposed to go somewhere by saying an urgent payment needs to be made. And yeah, these can vary in complexity, but they can be pretty convincing. And they've been even used inside banks. So even banks have been victim to these kinds of attacks. Phishing, I'm not going to go into it because it's so widely talked about. You probably know more than enough at this point about phishing. Fake invoices also really common. So, they will pose as being one of your suppliers and they will just send you an invoice for something that was never delivered. Actually happens and sadly is also sometimes successful. Brand hijacking will also be quite common. So people will use established brands and make use of that to direct people to their malicious pages. And overpayment scams is kind of the business version of a refund scam, where you receive a larger payment than you were supposed to receive, and then they'll ask you to pay the difference back, and then afterwards you'll see the payment get reversed and you're out the difference, essentially. So we can go to the next slide. So these are some of the typical attacks that we see more towards individuals themselves. So again, important to be aware of the existence of some of these. The romance scam, very, very common. Where we kind of exploit people's emotions and feelings to then get financial gain out of them. Nowadays, very common is what we call the investment or the pig butchering scam. Typically starts with a wrong number type of message on WhatsApp or a text message or something like that, where somebody contacts a person that isn't the actual person because they don't know who they're contacting. And then they kind of say, oh, I'm sorry, wrong number. And they try to establish a relationship with that person. And then at some point, it always leads to investing, typically through crypto. And they'll try to get the person to invest some money with the promise of very, very high returns. Of course, that money will be gone at the point you invested. And they'll even try to extort more money. Once you try to get your investment out, they'll basically keep for more and There are many other common scams like blackmail scams, identity theft and account takeover, fake job and fake check scams are also quite common, especially with job seekers because they might be a bit more desperate for that specific new job. Refund scam, also a very common one that's being operated typically from India. Tech support scam, same thing. We have entire call centers running in India focusing on tech support scams. So there are many, many different scams available. And hopefully I can give you a couple of tips on how to stay a bit safer from some of these. So if we go to the next slide, please. So it's the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is a famous psychologist, if I'm not mistaken, that kind of built this pyramid, which has like the foundations for our psychology and our basic needs as human beings. And what they'll often do is they'll threaten some of these levels inside this pyramid. And by threatening those, they can kind of affect you, or they'll play into those. It's not always threatening. It's with the most basic ones we threaten. With the other ones, we actually try to fulfill them. So one of the best things you can actually do is just trust your instincts. You'll often hear from people after the facts that, yeah, I saw so many red flags, but I went ahead and did it anyway. Usually because the promise of, let's say, financial return, for example, is just so great that they can't help themselves. But essentially, we often kind of have a gut feeling that's usually quite good. So if you have to ask yourself or ask anyone else if it's a scam, I can guarantee you it's 99% of the time it is a scam if you have to ask. So I always recommend people to kind of stop, think and reflect if something is happening. And if what's being asked of you also makes sense. For example, if you are somehow part of an investigation of Interpol in terms of some massive human trafficking crime, I can guarantee you that Interpol will not send you an email to tell you about that and ask you to pay a fine. If they're looking for you, they will find you. They will definitely not email you or give you a phone call to do that. So that's something you should keep in mind. Often, if you think about these things for a second, you'll see that a lot of it doesn't make sense. Another thing I recommend is to use two-factor authentication wherever you can on all your accounts. If it's a financial account, even avoid SMS 2FA. As other people have already said, SIM swapping is really, really common nowadays and really, really dangerous. So I would stay away from SMS 2FA in terms of financial accounts. And finally, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's a good rule of thumb. There's many promises nowadays about massive financial returns that are completely unrealistic. Just don't fall for it. It really doesn't exist. These, I know crypto kind of influenced that mindset that you can have these ridiculous returns, but it's still very, very unlikely. And then going to the next slide, I think I've got a few more. Another really good tip I can give you is using ad blockers in your web browser and other kinds of privacy extensions. Why? Because fraudsters love ads, especially social media ads. So social media ads are very, very poorly controlled. So you'll find a lot of the fake kind of brand pages and phishing pages are served through social media ads. So, why not get rid of the annoyance and get rid of the tricks and dangers from ads by using ad blockers? It's something I personally always do. Also, avoiding piracy and other peer-to-peer file sharing. They're notorious for containing malware. So yes, you might be able to get something for free, but it's probably not worth it because they'll get your machine compromised, they'll get your identity, they'll get your credentials, they'll get everything else. Another thing is in terms of mobile applications, try to avoid third-party app stores and application sideloading. Again, these kinds of app stores are filled with malicious applications for a reason, because they cannot or shouldn't be publishing them on the official app stores. Now, I have a side note. That means official app stores do not imply safety. And what does that mean? Especially Google, but even Apple's App Store is not perfect. You will find plenty of malicious applications on the official app stores. So even if you find something on the Google Play Store, for example, it doesn't mean that this application is safe. So you can maybe see the picture on the right. These are all WhatsApp applications on Google Play. There's only one real one. So these are all kind of pretending to be WhatsApp, and I can guarantee you all the others are not legit applications and have some malicious gain for the attacker. And I think with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. So I hope that was interesting.